Another thing I want to talk about on this Friday the 13th, while I have this rare opportunity, is how we did get through Hurricane Francine, which it's easy to remember that Francine sounds like France, and it went to the only state in the U.S. that's associated with French culture, or used to be. People have French names, and there's a French Quarter in New Orleans, but so Hurricane Francine, and the other one was Hurricane Beryl in July. So I'll think of a bear in Texas, big like Texas. And so we got through Hurricane Francine, and so we actually it was very similar. It gave me deja vu to Rita, which was the hurricane that basically got me obsessed with hurricanes for a while. And Hurricane Rita was the situation where they tried to evacuate the whole entire city of Houston. Like, they evacuated, oh my gosh, it's like so much hype. After Katrina, it was like Category 5, Category 5, Category 5. You better get out now, get out of town. And so that's all they used all that hype to get people to evacuate. And what ended up happening is, like so many times before, they almost always seem to make landfall toward like the east, in the easternmost part of the cone of possibility, so to speak, where they have that big old thing, like when the hurricane first gets in the Gulf, and it could go anywhere from here to here. Well, you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be toward the eastern side that gets the direct landfall of the hurricane. And they just tend to curve more than expected. And so what happened was it went further east, and really not by much. It's amazing how just a slight change makes such a huge difference with those storms. And so it went toward the east of where they were insisting that it was gonna go. And also the other thing it did was it slightly weakened, and that's always a good thing. It came down, like they were thinking it was going to be a Category 5. Well, it wasn't when it made landfall, okay? And really, Katrina wasn't a 5 either. And, so just because it's a Category 5 out in the water does not mean that it will make landfall at that intensity. They tend to, what happens is, like, the outer bands come ashore long before the hurricane or the eye wall. And as they do so, it helps weaken it, because they rain out over the land. And so what happened was Rita, came down a little bit in intensity. And this was like September 23rd of 2005. And so they canceled school for a week. And then they tried to evacuate Houston. And we were made to feel like dumbasses for not listening to that hype and not evacuating, because we ended up writing it out. And it turns out that it was more of what you call a glancing blow, or it's like, when you get only the western edge of the storm, like, you get some outer band, so it definitely rains, and you hear the wind, it's kind of eerie sounding, and with nobody around town having stayed, it's especially eerie. And so we did get something from it, of which people were in denial, because a lot of them weren't there to experience what little we got. And we did lose power for 15 hours. It melted our ice cream, and it did cause, minor issues. But by and large, we were spared the brunt of it, the worst of it. The stuff that they were reporting on for months or whatever. The stuff that didn't get rebuilt until well into 2006. That kind of stuff, we didn't get that, but we did get something. It was more than a typical thunderstorm. It was more of a windstorm. It has, there's just that tropical smell about it that I can't describe. A tropical storm or hurricane just has a different kind of smell. Yeah, that you really just can't put into words. And so we did get like a little bit of weather, for about 24 hours maybe, to varying degrees as it made landfall. But once it made landfall, it went to the east, and of course, like always, they just get caught up in the jet stream or whatever. Or what they really do is they just kind of rain out over the northern states over a couple days, maybe 2 days, and then they're gone, they die. And it happens like that with every hurricane. And so everybody just goes crazy the minute they say, oh, it's going to be category 5, and they tell you where they think it's going to hit. Well, that changes over the few days that it takes to actually get there. And so it almost always, that's why there are there's certainly more major hurricanes in Louisiana and states east of Louisiana, like Florida and all that. The further east you go, it tends to have more major hurricanes and certainly like more landfalls, because as I stated before, I used to joke about how they don't have hurricanes in Texas, which of course is silly, but it's kind of like a lot of the things I used to say, like being an alien and crap like that, who couldn't get a cold, and you know what I'm saying. But I used to joke about how they don't have hurricanes in Texas, and I mean, the truth in that is that they're just slightly more likely to make landfall to the east, simply because they just curve more. They tend to curve more. So in order for them to hit Texas, they almost have to be forecast to hit South Texas or Central Texas or even northern Mexico. You know what I'm saying? Like, hurricanes that actually make landfall in Houston were initially forecast to be like Central Texas, I guess Corpus Christi or something like that. Hurricanes that were forecast to hit Houston will often go like Sabine Pass, Orange, Texas, like Cameron, Louisiana, like, basically the Texas-Louisiana border, the Sabine River, like Rita. And then the ones that are forecast to hit there will often hit like Louisiana, central Louisiana. And then, the ones forecast for central Louisiana will often hit like New Orleans and, western Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi. And, and so on and so forth. And that's why Florida has so many hurricanes. It's basically the hurricane state. They can get 4 of them in a year. And so, like, it's just always been a fascination, just like colds. It became a fascination because of Rita, because I was forced to think about it. And that's how so many of my obsessions would go. It's like I'd be forced to think about something that I'd never really considered a lot. Maybe I'd heard of it, but not considered it too much in the past. And I'd be forced by some circumstance to think about something a lot for whatever reason, despite having not really cared about it before, or only being mildly familiar with it beforehand, just like the Friday the 13th thing 28 years ago on this day, because I was 13. I was in the 7th grade, but that lucky number didn't really cancel it out. So I was 13, it was Friday the 13th, and I was number 13 on the list of students in my homeroom class for whatever reason. I just happened to be the 13th out of however many students. And so I'd see that number 13 because the teacher would write like, your name and your student number in her class. And so those things caused me to have triskaidekaphobia, the fear of the number 13 and all multiples thereof, like 26, 39, 52, but I mean, it extends out way, it doesn't matter what number it is. Like the year 2002, I did not like graduating in 2002 because it's 154 times 13. And so, I just have this obsession with 13 and, bad luck. And, I just became very obsessed with it, just like the storms. I began to really obsess on hurricanes in 2005 when we were mildly affected by Rita, but mentally I was a lot more affected because we had to think about it the whole week leading up to it. And so I just became very fascinated and obsessed with hurricanes to the point where, I started studying about them more than ever, and I researched the ones in history that had affected Texas, like, historical Texas hurricanes, like in September 8th, 1900. And, the fact that it happened on 9/11 is also very significant because 9/11, is the peak of the hurricane season, is around the peak of the hurricane season. Well, about 3 months in. So it begins in June, ends November 30th. So September is about 3 months in. So early September is the peak. And so, just began to obsess on hurricanes and storms and things like that. Weather, the year 2005, 2006. And it sort of pushed my obsession with the common cold into the back seat. And as a result of not thinking about that as much, I didn't catch a clinical cold, until March of that year. So during the off season, when the hurricanes were no longer in season, that's the first year that I ever had exactly one clinical cold. And then I would have one last year, the following year, with multiple ones. And then from there on out, it's like it was 1 or 0, but normally one, from 24 onward. So it was a turning point wherein the colds became less significant and the hurricanes kind of, it looks like anytime I have an obsession, it pretty much takes another obsession, to knock that ball out of the gutter, so to speak. It's almost like when you get your bowling ball stuck in a gutter, you have to get another bowling ball to knock it out. And, that's the way my obsessions have always been. The only way for me to get over one type of obsession is to have something very similar yet different that takes up the same amount of mental energy. And that's the key thing. It has to take up the same or more. If it takes up less mental energy, then I'll just end up with two obsessions simultaneously for the longest time. Sort of like the Rugrats obsession could coexist with the common cold, for the simple reason that, it was very similar. It was of a similar to me, because children that age get a lot of colds. And my sister liked it, and she got a lot of colds that year. And so they could coexist easily. In fact, they could go hand in hand. And so, depending on what the obsession is, it's like the only way to really get over one is to find another one that takes its place and does a really good job of that. You know what I'm saying? Because I can have an unlimited number of obsessions if none of them are very big. So, the hurricane obsession in 2005 kind of took over what was left of the cold obsession, right at a time when my sister was becoming a teenager and not bringing home quite as many. And so that is when the turning point occurred between me getting multiple colds pretty much every single year, my first 24 years of life, to suddenly never getting more than one from 24 onward. Then, of course, Yahoo Answers became my next obsession, that would take over, the mental energy and so on. I just stopped thinking quite as much about colds and, just found other things along the way. And then, of course, 2008, there would be Hurricane Ike that would cause kind of a relapse on the hurricane obsession. And just like every time, there's been a hurricane in Texas and or Louisiana, it just kind of rekindles that obsession with storms and weather. And, like I wrote that song about Texas rain. But yeah, it's just been an obsession with these hurricanes. And, but, it's just something that, I guess I'm just fascinated with things that are very intense at the moment, but that eventually run their course. And, there's just so many of my obsessions that fit that description to an extent, like the common cold, it's very bad for a week. You sound different, even if you don't go to the doctor, it definitely affects your voice. And, they would wreak havoc on my voice pretty much every single year. Um, Hurricanes, they're very bad, very windy, very intense. They knock out power lines when they're happening, but then they run their course. And as long as you don't have catastrophic damage, 6 months later, you never know there was a hurricane. Um, Trains are like that, they're very loud, very life threatening, they can kill you instantly. When they're there, and then they pass, and it's like, well, you don't have a train anymore until the next one. And just so many things. Friday the 13th, it's here today, but for a mean average of 7 months, it won't be. Everything that I'm obsessed with, is like that. It's like things that just come, again and again and again, and are very intense when they happen, but they run their course, they go away. And so those kind of cyclic things, just have always fascinated me. And, patterns in numbers, and it's just always been fascinated with math and science. Never relationships and people and love and all that flowery stuff. It just never really mattered to me. And so so I've never had a relationship. Well, I'm still virginal at 41. So yep, I guess I'll post this video and say that I'm glad we made it through Hurricane Francine, and not sure why people are thumbing down my videos, but oh well.